Well, you join us here on a Tuesday night in the Reloved Guitars workshop, and here tonight we have Sai and Sai's brand new Fender Player Telecaster, Player Series Telecaster. So what is this? Well, it's about 500 and something pounds of made in Mexico Fender. Am I right about that? I'm sure it is. Hold on one second. Yeah, it's made in Mexico. It's a 75th anniversary Fender as well. Made in Mexico Fender, and it's in that beautiful butterscotch finish, slightly translucent, so you get a real nice feel. There's a tiny little blemish. Oh, look, he says looking for minutiae. Tiny little blemish there. I think somebody touched that up with, let me find it. I get a feeling somebody's touched that up with a drop of paint. It's only very tiny, but you can see there's a dark line down there and a tiny touch up. Just a tiny detail. Just picking out, I'm very hypercritical picking things out. What we've got is pretty much in all respects very beautiful thing. You can see, I hope you can see the shades of the different pieces of wood under there. I mean, you can see grain, that's the one thing, and a little sort of knot in the wood or something, but you can see grain, and you can also see what's probably the different sections of wood that go into making this. So nice butterscotch body. Like I said, a tiny detail there. I think that is a factory touch-up. If we just go in again and have a quick look, yeah, that would be the case. I think. Yeah, they've put the neck on, and I think a tiny little chip has come off the what's it. So small blemishes, and then I suppose we're being really picky. There's another one there under the paint, sort of central in the screen right now. It's hard to see, but just a sort of little dark smudge. And then you could sort of equally argue that, if I get around here, you could argue possibly that that one is too. But you know, who knows? So what we have is a maple neck in I think it's quite a chunky one. I think it's a deep C, a fat C. If you look at the sort of the slimming downness, it isn't much. So it's a nice chunky vintage style neck. We've got your Alnico 5 pickups, single coils. We've got standard chrome fixtures. We have what look like jumbo frets. I don't know if they call them medium jumbo, but they're pretty chunky to me. And I think they're not too bad, but they're slightly irregular. So that, for example, the B is quite high relative to the others. So it's not perfect all round. We've got a metallic string tree, butterfly tree, which I always like to replace because they're just, we don't want metal in our string train, as I call it. Just turning it over, we've got the Fender tuning machines. They're made in Mexico, Fender 75. Nice satin finish on the back of the neck, very smooth and lovely. An F thingy there. Pretty flawless back of guitar, and one of the original style jack sockets, which personally I wish they'd do the screw-in ones, but that's just my personal take on it. So straight away, on the sort of material side of it, the physical side of it, everything about that is great except for that little tiny factory touch-up down there. The nut is as you'd sort of expect. It's a new bone nut that's interesting. It's been cut. I'll just try and zoom in. It's been cut in the factory to give it as much of a good chance as possible. And in one sense, I really like the fact that they've obviously put time into using a Tusk type material. Well, it's from the Graphtec, maybe it's Fender's own, but it's equivalent of the new bone, and it's a little bit chalky, but they call it in the spec, they call it synthetic bone. So they've gone quite some way to do it as well as they can, but I think there's a, looking at the nut, I don't know if you can see it, but it's sort of, it almost looks like it's on backwards. So you'd really be wanting to see that nut sloping up the other way. It looks like a left-handed nut there, which of course it isn't. Anyway, so I think we'll replace that with an adjustable one. And the reason why is, like I've explained in all the recent videos, is that I want to give my customers the benefit of unfiled slots if possible. So if we can get a Tusk, first of all, which is a harder material than the new bone. If we can get the Tusk material, which is also trouble-free, I've never had any trouble at all with it. If we can get Tusk, first of all, which is a good upgrade, and then if we can get it so that we can bring the strings up to the correct action rather than file down the nuts, that's a much better solution, because if we left this in here, we'd now have to cut down to balance these out, which would make it ragged, make the nuts ragged. So I'm trying to avoid doing that, which is the logic behind putting on an adjustable Tusk one. So some people have thought, am I making am I having a go at new bone or synthetic bone? No, it's better than plastic by a long shot. It's just never perfect to the degree that I want it to be. Oh, the other thing about this guitar is it's 22 frets, which is an addition to the classic sort of 21 fret Tele. We've got a 3-position switch in sort of classic Tele. I think if I were Fender, the one improvement I would probably make on this is these saddles. For me, these chromed saddles, they look like they've come off any Chinese guitar anywhere in the world, and they just don't feel Fender-y. And I don't mean they should be curly ones like on the Strats with Fender stamped on it, but I don't know, would it cost that much more to have the sort of the brushed steel ones that just look much better machined than those? I don't know, just my personal thing, but it's only an aesthetic detail. Had a test play of this afternoon. The action was set quite high for starters, so I've already lowered it down to where I would be aiming for it, because Cy wants it as low as it can go, and the brief being do whatever it needs. So I think what we'll do is we'll do the adjustable Tusk nut, we'll do the Tusk string tree. Now when I played it earlier on, we do have, and you're not going to hear this very well, we do have what we call fret slap on the low strings, which is very common as soon as we go down to our chosen low action. One of the things when I had the guitar out of the box first of all, and I went to bend or stretch the strings a little bit, the high E broke on me immediately. But actually what it's showing is that it's bending okay up the high frets, so there's it's not a problem with the frets. The reason I'll level them is only to gain or to free up that fret slap down here. So we'll hardly be touching the frets up at this end, or up on this side of the neck, shall we say. And then I obviously will polish everything out simultaneously together as we go. Fret end finishing is pretty good. Doesn't feel sharp at all. So that's what we're going to do. Strap button's all good, and plays, switching's all good. Volume and tone as it should be. Nothing kind of surprising. And then we'll obviously make sure it's intonated. I tested out the intonation early on, and it wasn't intonated. It was everything. It currently isn't. Everything is a little bit sharp, so everything seems to have to move back a little bit, but we'll try it out. I think the other thing I noticed about this guitar is it had came with a very small amount of neck relief, but just about about what you'd want, about 0.2, so I wouldn't worry about that. What I don't know about this slot is whether it's curved or whether it's that other thing, flat. So it'll be a little bit of careful work to remove this. It actually isn't finished or lacquered in. Oh yes, it is, just a little bit. So we'll use the scalpel just to break that seal. These frets have been done in the sort of standard factory way, which, sorry, the fingerboard has been done in the standard factory way, which is, I don't know if you can see that when it's, you can tell when the light's bouncing off it. It's interesting. There's quite a lot of kind of, what would the word be? I see it. I can't see it with the single eye of the camera lens, but you see right as you go up to the edge of the fret, there's a sort of rucked. The finish looks like it's crumpled slightly. You see where the light reflects off, so it shows it's like a little wave. Now I don't know whether that's the frets being tapped onto, and it's hard to tell whether it's going up or down. It's hard to know whether these have been tapped on or pressed pretty hard onto the finish, which is sort of bent down and sort of pressed down as you do it, or whether it's the result that you sometimes get when you fret first and then spray a finish over the top, and you get this kind of wave carpet feeling or carpet look as the clear finish goes up and over. I'm trying to just show you what I can see here. There's some sort of crimples and crumples. You see that? Anyway, I'm praying, already praying, that this isn't one of these fingerboards that's suffering from any problems with adhesion, because some Fender maple necks I've had in the past where the finish just falls off as soon as you start looking at it, which is pretty depressing. So you can see that I think that looks like a pressed down, don't you? But is it pressed down? Is it crumpling the wood, compressing the wood, which makes the finish go down with it? Or am I looking at the carpet effect? I think we're looking at pressing down damage in inverted commas. So I guess that's the consequence of squeezing hard on something soft like wood and finish. I mean, it looks great. If I'm looking very close up at this, but I'm looking at. It looks like it's slightly damaged the finish as the frets have been either pressed or tapped down quite hard. So who knows what that is? But overall, from a tiny bit of distance and with a tiny bit less critical eye than mine, or finicky eye, it looks great and it feels nice to play. That's a great chord, accidentally. I think we're down tuned. Yeah, we're tuned down one semitone, which makes it good for playing Yellow by Coldplay. Right. Okay, so let's get started. Let's find, I'll just carry on talking while I go and find a Tusk white string tree, which I have right here, and its associated screw. Sometimes when I only use one out of a pack, I sort of, obviously I end up with the other of the pair. So I've got one black one and one white one in here. So there's the Tusk string tree. So the time of this is going to be tied up really in getting the nut right and getting rid of the what I call fret slap. So I guess Cy, whose guitar this is, may have seen these videos where I've talked about this before, but if you haven't, if you haven't, what I'm aiming to do with touching the frets of this at all, or let's put it another way, if you come to a guitar neck and you find the way normally you find you've got high frets is that you let's use the whiteboard. The way you normally find out you've got high frets, zoom out, is by trying to bend a note, sorry, I was trying to play a note and it chokes. So typically a high fret will look like this. There's a fret that you're pressing the string onto, and then let's imagine there's a ridiculously high fret there and another fret. So what happens is you finger presses down on the string onto the fret there, and it comes away and it tries to go off towards the nut, which is the saddle, and you can see obviously the clearance there on the next fret would be tiny even if everything was good, but on the high fret it impacts it. So most of us know that obviously when you're in that situation, what you have to do is you have to take down that fret and level it so that it gives you back that little bit of clearance that you need. And the way we do it obviously is a leveling beam, and which takes the exaggerated high piece off that fret, which makes it kind of look like that. And then what we do is we now know it's the same height as those, and then we recrown it, and we make it the same height, only we put the roundness back onto it, and that gives us the right height, and we've kind of tidied up the shape. So that's leveling a high fret. And when you have a high fret, you normally find it by playing the note. You fret the note behind it, and you try and fret that note, and this note is either choked completely and it doesn't play, chocked, no, that's not the right way to spell it, or it buzzes in the way we kind of know. It's quite familiar when we've got high frets. So it's either a choking or buzzing experience. But the really important thing about what I call fret buzz is it's usually in just one place. Right? It's a particular fret somewhere. You might have one or two on the whole neck, but they're usually right on their own somewhere. Now the thing you might be interested to know is that choking and buzzing, when we say fret buzz, it's caused, what I call fret buzz, is caused either by a high fret, as we just saw, or occasionally there's another thing that happens, which is a bit mad. Let's put this back to normal height. Fret buzz and choking can be caused by the strange beast called a low fret. Okay, that number 1 in the line now is low. And what happens with that is when you're fretting to a low fret, you press the string down, and because it's lower than normal, you basically make the next fret hit it. So that next fret becomes effectively high. It's not really high, it's the same as all the rest of them, but this low fret makes the next one effectively high. But again, in the case of any kind of fret buzz, whether it's made by low or high frets, individual rogue frets, we get the same experience. It gives you a buzz, kind of buzzy sound on that one fret, or it chokes and it doesn't play cleanly. And that's familiar, that we get the fret leveling beams and we level our frets, and once we've leveled them, then those problems go away. That's cool. But there's another kind of buzz that I've kind of identified over the years. It's, for many people it sounds and feels the same. If I put the other one at the top, I call fret buzz what we've just talked about, and I use the word buzz. And now there's another one that I call fret slap. And I've invented the term just to differentiate it from buzz, and it doesn't, you could come up with a better term, whatever. But this is interesting because it seems to be caused by, in a way, when I think of fret slap, first of all, what it is, it's the sound we just played on those low notes. Ready? You noticed how that little zzz, zzz sounds the same on every note. So it's not the fret buzz I was talking about before, right, which is very specific to 1 or 2 frets, and it doesn't happen all the way up. The thing I call fret slap is that funny accompanying buzz that you get. Now you could call it fret buzz, but the reason I differentiate it is because I think it's caused by something else. It's not a single high fret. And this is what I've worked out over the time. We think of our relieved guitar neck as a curve, right? And that's cool, but it isn't really. The truth is, our neck is sort of like this. Now that's exaggerated, all right, for effect. And what you have is you have a sort of cluster of high. We have a low spot, then we have a bit higher, a group of frets, and then we have a sort of bit of a low one, and then we have a sort of so-so, pretty much more or less the same-ish, right? Or something like that, any mixture of the above, right? Now that just tells you that wood under pressure, under compression, behaves in that sort of way. It's never a perfect curve. So I call this the imperfect curve of the neck, which makes sort of sense, because now you might not believe me that it does that, but when I start fret leveling on this guitar, you'll see that the fret leveling beam that I use will show you where it is higher and lower, and it's different on every single guitar, but it always shows up higher or lower. So that's the evidence I go by. So if I just take away these little labels for a minute, so we've got this strange crinkly up and downy neck, sort of landscape, like a hilly landscape, but to our eyes it's curved. So what we do is, in my method that I use for fret leveling, it's not my own method, but the method I use, I take 3 sample points along this curve and I put down the, I tune the leveling beam to those 3 sample points, and those scientisty type people, mathematics people, will get straight away that if I tune this, let's say that's a bit of a crap, let's bend this. Now I've done the nice curve, let's just change the end of this to make it fit. So what we end up with is something, as you can see, like that. So the blue one is the truss rod I'm using as the leveling beam, which we know when I adjust it, it bends into a fairly smooth curve. In fact, it's actually smoother than the neck itself. And you can see straight away now that we've sampled, and I think the idea of sampling is really important because we've got 3 sample points. So it's not an accurate representation, it's a sort of perfect curve, and it's, if you like, it's an ideal curve, and it's ideal because it's only looking at 3 sample points. If I sampled every point and recreated it, it would have to follow the lines and it would be as imperfect as the actual neck. So I call it a perfect or ideal curve, and it's ideal because we're using the fret leveling beam, which is a truss rod, and it's perfect because of the limited number of sample points. Well, how the hell does that help? Why am I telling you any of that, and how does it help us? Well, it helps me because, let's say I've cured the fret buzz from any individual frets that were getting in the way, but we're still left, and I can tell you on this neck there are no single frets that choke out or buzz. So we haven't got fret buzz, as I call it, but we have got this fret slap on the lower strings. And what I learned over the years is the reason we've got that is that something about this slightly bumpy neck, which is getting in the way of the strings spinning, particularly the strings that spin more than the others. So this fret slap noise isn't really there on the higher notes, but down on the lower notes, for a similar playing action, it's saying I can't quite do this. What I found with this fret leveling method is if I, if you like, gently allow this curve to come down and impose itself onto this imperfect world, you see what happens is we just, yeah, these aren't frets, don't forget, this is just, those are the sample points. But if we gently bring down the bar onto this imperfect curve, you can see what it does is it will just gently take down a group of high frets, and this taking down of the group of high frets seems to alleviate what I call the fret slap. So it gives the strings back a tiny bit of space again, where previously they would be probably connecting, you know, the strings as they spin, they would hit something there and they'd probably just hit something there, and maybe a little bit up there. So it seems to me, it's not a very scientific explanation, but it seems to me that that's what works. But it's the only way I can explain why I think it works, but it certainly does work, this using the beam to alleviate this, what I call fret slap. And it's interesting because very often you get guitars. I've been finding it recently with a lot of Epiphones. They've a lot of the new inspired by Gibson Epiphones have done a great leap forward in the quality of their fretwork, and I'm not finding individual high or individual high frets anymore, or rarely. Occasionally I'll still find a one or two low frets, and that will cause a problem. But I'm rarely finding, you know, individual high frets or low frets. I'm now finding much more that we're getting these little clusters, hills and valleys. And I'm basically when I'm doing the leveling, when I play the guitar through, I check for fret buzz, and if I know, for example, on a guitar like this, I didn't find any fret buzz, then I know that I'm not going to see any individual fret really cut up more than any of the others. But if when I'm testing it, if I find a lot of fret slap, I know that most of my leveling is going to be aimed at this gentle clipping of the tops of these hills so that they are closer, or they level out the discrepancy between the hills and the valleys. So it's I suppose the simple way is it's like dealing with clusters of high frets in a group as opposed to single ones, and that's probably the best way. So fret buzz, we could call it individual fret buzz, and then we could call it group fret buzz for these things. I just called it slap because I think it's about space, where of course both of them are about space. You know, if the fret's too tall or the early one's too low, of course there isn't enough space and you get buzz. So I just call them two different words so that I can explain what I mean. Anyway, so that's why on a guitar that, you know, you pick up and play, but of course straight away you can't play at can't play at the ideal desired low action, and that's, in this case, it's because we've got fret slap, which I think is from the overall slight undulations in the neck, and the experience has shown me that's more than likely to be the case. So what I'm going to do straight away is I'm going to take the first thing off, which is going to be that thing that we know as the string tree. And I'll keep this and the nut, providing the nut comes off easily. One of the things about removing nuts from new guitars is if they're fixed in any way, toughly fixed, firmly fixed in, then we probably need to take care to remove them with a cutter rather than try and you know, tap them out, especially in a something with quite brittle poly like this. Now I'm going to widen this this hole slightly because let me just double check, but the diameter of this screw is slightly different on the adjustable nut. Is it? Actually, this one is very similar. Obviously, what I don't want, I've got to be always very conscious and careful, is I don't want to run any risk of widening or putting pressure on the hole. So I have a couple of different drill bits here. One of them I'll use just to widen the hole at the top, excuse the noise. And then the other one I'll make sure, yeah, that's fine, deep enough. Okay, then I shall reinstall this. So that's just giving it a tiny bit relieving the pressure that would otherwise be on the finish and the wood. So there we have our new Tusk inspired, Tusk made thing. String tree. So this will now be string rubbing against Tusk, not against that metal, which doesn't probably cause it to be too far out of tune, but it does add drag to it. Now with this nut, I'm going to remove the strings. Sometimes I don't if I can get them out of the way, but I'm going to just take them off the tuners for now because I want full clear run at these this nut, so I can use my destructive tools upon it. So it looks painful, but it's the only way you can remove a nut safely. I'll just double check that the spacing that I've got on my Strat 9.5 Tusk nut here does in fact match. Now I've already got one that I made up earlier. Here's one I made earlier, which is made up for another situation, and that one is slightly, no, it's about the same. We could use that one. Let's just try this other one. I've got a flat bottom one here, bottomed one here, and I'm just going to check the spacing, which I would say is exactly good on there. Right, so we've got choice, and sometimes I need to modify one or the other depending on what we do. But the first thing to do is to gently move the strings out of the way. I'm going to avail myself of a very sharp blade, and I'm going to work my way very carefully, I don't know what you can see there, around the edge. And I think what I'll do is I'll just rest this against the something here so that I can concentrate on the edge without what do I need? What else do I need? I'm looking for a cloth. Don't mind that it's got sawdust on it, that's fine. I just want a soft surface. So I'm just going to put that here as a thing to lean this against, so I can feel comfortable working on the nut. Can you see what I'm doing? Yes, so that's safely propped. Okay, well while I'm here I'm going to start on this side. So I'm going to very gently get my scalpel and cut into the finish along the edge there, and in the same angle I'm going to hold it carefully and start there. So this is just to make sure that any finish is that they do, on this end they've actually put finish over the end of the nut. I'm just going to make sure that this finish only comes off on the nut part. So I start by very gently running the blade down there just to kind of make a line of traction for the blade, and then I put a little bit more force into cutting that, making sure it's severed. So again I'm going to do the sideways motion. It's actually very hard to see where the joint is here, so again I'll just let the blade lead the way and then give it a little bit of downward force, and then coming this way I'm going to put a little bit of pressure on and guide it with my hand like so. Okay, so that has made sure that when the nut comes out, it's going to come out with no finish around it. Now it's actually got quite a bit of dust or grime leading up to this nut, so I'm going to sort of gently score my way along here just in case the finish has been, there's no good reason why the finish will have been sprayed with the nut in. Well, maybe it was. I get the feeling that when there's stuff over the end bits that it's kind of deliberately hand painted on, but I could be wrong. So I'm just going down the kind of corner of this just to make sure that as soon as we get the pieces to move, it's going to come away. Right, now the next thing I'm going to do is going to bring in the scary heavy lifting tools. It's going to make a noise, so I ask you to forgive me. So I'm going to get myself into a comfortable position where I know where things are, and I'm going to cut my way into this. It's messy, all right. So there's our first kind of work on it, and you can sort of assess how far down it is or isn't on either side. It's about halfway down at this moment in time. So if you ever removing a nut this way and you do go through too low with the cutter, it's not the end of the world. Okay, wow, that's got quite a bit of finish gone up the side there. It's not the end of the world because you can you know, it doesn't affect the sort of seating of any replacement nut. So this is, there you go, there's a strip of thin coating of finish sprayed up the side of the nut. Come out of the hole. So what I don't know at this point in time is how much glue has been used to hold this thing in place. So if you're in the mood of keeping it going in a straight line, you can get out your little razor saw. It's another approach. Slower. So this is a, I hope this hasn't been glued on both sides because that would be a bit extreme. Making it difficult for guitar techs and luthiers to change nuts is not the best look for a guitar firm. Although many of the Chinese-made guitars from budget companies like Vintage and a few others that I've come across have indeed produced their guitars in such a way that they fit the nut, particularly on the the 3-a-side headstock. They fit the nut, and then spray all their finish, paint and clear coat up onto the back side of the nut, basically in a skirt, and that stops it moving at all. And it means that when you actually come to try and take it off, if you don't cut it off, you can often take off great big shards of the headstock finish with it. So you've got to be ready to cut it off. So as we come down, we've got we've still got obviously a join. We're nearly through to the bottom, and so we've got nothing to pull on, but now we can do that, which is sort of break the thing down the middle, and then because it's folded, the whole thing comes out, the remains. Okay, so there we go, nice and clean. A little bit of a lip here from where the finish is sprayed up, but that's so close up against the nut itself, it's really not a problem. So I'm just going to see whether this is custom cut ready for this usage, which would be cool. It would be a bit lucky if it was. I'm not sure it will be. Well, you never know. It's a little bit too wide at the moment. Let's do a tiny sanding adjustment and see if we can persuade it to play the game. Looking for, where's it gone? Seem to have lost a sanding piece. how much far off we are width-wise. A little bit. Oh, here it is. So I'm just working to very gently thin this nut a tiny bit so that it will go into this slot. If it's no good, I'll use the other one. That's nearly there. I can almost fit it in. So let's have a look at the shape and the profile. What we can do is I'm continuing to use the finest paper possible to, to really work my way to the thickness very slowly, so I don't kind of overcut. Because when you do that, you're down a nut, and it can get expensive. So that's kind of almost perfectly snug in place, actually. So we're not far off. What I'll do is I'll just do a little bit of sanding on this back side here. That'll probably slip in beautifully, like I'm going to go and sneeze, excuse me. Pardon me. There we are. Okay, so that's neatly fitted. I think it's still a tiny bit too wide. And it's a little bit difficult to keep it at the angle I want it, to thin it down. So I'm going to have to just try and manually thin it. It's got a nice fit, but it needs to thin out a little tiny bit more on this top edge. I shall try and use the grub screws. So this is already made up, so it would be quite cool if this would work. This would be the right piece. Save making it from scratch. Because basically all that we do is come back to pretty much the same point again. Right, that sits in quite comfortably. That is sitting on a little foot a minute. Let's just pull that back in so it's not sitting on that bit. There we are. Right, very nearly done. I'm just going to do a little bit of last bit of flattening on the bottom side. So this part of the business takes a while, and it's one of the most precise parts of it. But it is so because when you get it right, you get such a nice payoff in terms of how it works and the ease in which you can make adjustments to it with, for example, the height, if you want to make a change. Come on now. And as I said before, that the primary reason I like this approach is because it doesn't make any permanent changes to your guitar. So if you want to sell the guitar and revert it to a kind of conventional nut, you can, but as it stands, it will give you perfect first fret action without worrying about cutting those slots, which is the good part of it. So I'm just fine-tuning this nut. So I want it just to start off by sitting in there perfectly flat. Of course, that means that my nut slot has to be also perfectly flat, and sometimes that isn't guaranteed. In fact, this one appears, unless I'm mistaken, has a very slight curve on it. Is that a 9.5 curve? That's really interesting. It is very slightly curved. Okay, so that's the way it is. With this nut, it's not really a big issue because it's going to stand on its little feet anyway. What I can do, just to fix that, is put a very, very small bit of curvature. It isn't going to touch anything anyway, like I said, but it's, I guess I'm just looking for, in fact, it's a silly thing to do, I don't need to do it. Yeah, the point of this is that we overcome the curvature of the bass by standing it on its little feet. So the point being is, when it's on its little feet like that, it will be independent of the curve, and we should have our first fret action should be just about spot on, which it is. Right, so I won't bother carving the underside to make it a curved one. What I will do though is I'll get the couple more screws that I need for this job, adjustable nuts, and I will also turn the blower heater off for a minute. I bought that blower from one of those kind of work tool shed type places, and it's the weediest heater I've ever had in my life. So what I first will do is I'm going to get two slightly pointed. These the ones grub screws in this nut are they are flattened. I've sanded them to make them flat, and that's one of the reasons for that, is that it spreads the load of the foot. And then I'm going to replace them with these pointed grub screws, which I'm going to use for marking a couple of small impressions on the slot in here. So what I do is I line up the nut where I will be wanting it. And I'll support directly underneath like that. So I'm lining the nut up. And it's going to be a tiny bit. It is a tiny bit over each end at the moment, so I'll need to just trim it. I go one there and one there. That gives me two little dots on the board. And then I can get my sharp pencil and just mark those so I know they're there. What else was I going to do? I was just going to do something and I've forgotten what it was. Oh yes, I was going to just do the ends, trim down the ends of this to make them flush. So I think we've got an end-to-end measurement here, yep, which I can borrow. And the end-to-end of the original one is 4211, and this is probably going to be 43, yeah, 4306. So to just narrow it down, I'm going to use this thing here. Oh no, it's got a radius on it. I'm going to use the flat one here, and I'm just going to use it to take down a very small amount off the each end until we get to, what do we say, 4211. 4211. That might be a quicker way of doing this. It's cute, but maybe a bit too much. Well, 42 something. I'll take a bit more off. And we'll use the block to perhaps round that a little bit. So I want to get to 4211, 4252. I know it sounds like a 60s record. In the year 4262. Okay, I think we're probably teetering on the spot. Yep, that's fine. Now what I'll do is I'll just round over the edges here so they feel smooth and not too sharp. That one, and that one, and that one. Okie doke, right. So I'll take all of these sanding things out of the way. Put them back in there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to make a small indentation with my finger, as this drill isn't the one to do it with. So I'm hand drilling in the true sense of the word. So I get a little tiny, small bit, and I'm just going to let it center on that little mark, start point that I made. And then I'll just go to the same size one, possibly a slightly bigger one, and just put a tiny bit of deepening on that slot, dent. And what I'm doing is I'm just making a little indentation for the grub screws to seat into, so that they won't move from side to side, and that's what keeps the thing in place, the nut in place. Okay, what I'm also going to do is a little tidying and a tiny bit of countersink on the opening of the hole, because it looks better. Right, in goes the grub screw, which has already been shortened and flattened. In goes the other one. So now the time is here to check it. So these go right, the grub screws go right through, and then they sit nicely in their little impressions. And then we've got a bit of faffering around with sharp used strings. Now what I'll do is I'll put the G and the D on first, just so that they can hold this nut in place. And that's what I would advise in taking off and putting on. So when it comes to it, take off the outer strings first, leaving the middle two on, and vice versa, the other way. When you're putting the strings on, middle two on first. So that's cool. I'll get that ready. But what I'll do is I'm just going to pull up. That's what happens if you're not careful. You shoot the nut off to the side. While I'm here, I was thinking it would be a smart move to just go down and very carefully mark up the fret tops. And so this is going to be ready for the fret leveling. So if you're ever doing this, you can't see now, I'm out of the way, but if you're nervous about controlling the pen, then you'd be well advised to mask off the fingerboard with masking tape first. If you do find yourself getting marker pen onto clear gloss poly like this, don't despair, because while naphtha may not remove it to your satisfaction, cellulose thinners carefully applied on a rag will, and it won't do anything to the poly, because the poly is inert as far as the cellulose thinners are concerned. Okay, so I'm just now going to put this G string back on and tighten it up. Okay, so I can, well, I'll do the rest of the strings first. So what I'll do, once I've got the strings on, I'll then I'll put them under a little bit of load just to keep them tightened, and then what I'll do is raise up the nut a small fraction. Now, in my experience of these adjustable Tusk nuts, they raise up by a very small, they can compress a very small amount when you first put them on, but I don't think these will go any much further. But of course the beauty is you can make adjustments by raising them up, which I'm doing at that end, but I can't really see the effect because I haven't got all the strings on. So here I am working with already used strings. I've managed to get black marker pen on my finger, which I have to watch out for. Right, so that's the sort of precision bit of the nut done, and then we'll follow up now with the precision bit of the fret leveling. Quite difficult to work with the existing or previously used strings because they sometimes don't want to behave with their coils at the end. Yeah, they whatever they did when they sprayed this, and they kind of built up some sort of crud either side of the nut, which was visible from the beginning. It's not really a good way to clear that up other than sanding it back, which I'm slightly worried will dull down too much of the finish. So I'm kind of nervous about tweaking it. Okay, so let's just raise this at this end until we've got a playing action. Yay! On this end. There we have it. Off to one side with that thing, little hex key that's used for making future adjustments. What I'm going to do now is use the tuning fork to get a starter note. Spare Harley Benton string on the high E, don't break. Okay, so I'm just sort of moving a few things around and out of the way while I can. There we have the strings playing, the adjustable nut in place. Put my adjustable nut department away. Throw some more Tusk things on the floor. I've got the biggest collection of Tusk this side of anywhere. Right, out the way. You can go out the way too. My stand. Those I like those cloths, those microfiber cloths, but they're useless if you get them anywhere near sawdust. They just pick up the sawdust and hold it forever, and you can't lose it. You can't get a shot of it, unfortunately. Okay, so we've got our nut set. I'm just going to now double check the playing action, the last fret action, so that I'll just be sure before I do any leveling that we're where I want to be. Such a good feeling. Okay, so it's a 9.5 Telecaster, so I'm going to aim for no less than 1.5. It's not like a ultra flexible necked SG. It's a Telecaster and it's 9.5, so I'm going to go for that as my start point. Be very precise about it, and then I go from that to similar height. It's a bit over. I just work our way across over to 1.2-ish on the treble side. So my normal run is 1.5 over to about 1.2, and that gives us a sort of a gradient. So we're about 1.5 on the high E at the moment, which is a bit high. That's realistically a little bit high, that's a little bit low. Tweak, I think we're good. Let's just check the G. G is 1.5, that's still a bit higher than that one. There we are. Right, now that will have changed the tuning very slightly, so I'll just retweak it. The only reason now I want it in tune for the fret leveling is for the tension. There we have it. That's the target action set. So you can see that the difference in this approach is that I can basically, with this approach, I'm choosing the action I want for this guitar and I'm making the frets comply with it. And that's very different from how most of us experienced playing the electric guitar when we were youngsters, insofar as we got the guitar and we lowered the action until we couldn't because we had buzzing and whatever. So it was the sort of uneven frets on the guitar, or the condition of the frets on the guitar, that would dictate our playing action. And this way around with the setup, with any good setup, should be about setting the action we want and making the guitar capable of accommodating it. And of course, in this case, to accommodate it, for the reasons I've kind of talked through before, we have to do some gentle work on the frets. And I mean gentle, it's a very gentle process. So let me just put you in the corner over there. Nobody puts fret leveling baby in the corner. I just want you to be able to see the thing. I'll show you a close-up in a minute when I've done the first bit of leveling. So this curious method, I'm going to get hold of, here's my 3 sample points. I'm going to basically take a digital snapshot, digital being, you know, increments. Okay, I'm making it up, but that's what I call it. And I'm going to bend this tool till it maps the 3 positions basically of these 3 sample points. And in doing so, I will create effectively an ideal curve across these 3 points. The best curve possible that takes into account those 3 points. And because of course the middle one will be slightly lower, it will then be a curve on this tool. Now it's how do you know? Well, it's a touchy-feely thing that I've been doing for a long time, and when I do it I know where it is. So now I can gently relax that one, the IE, and I'm now going to start the leveling process. And this, I don't really have any need to do any serious leveling because I don't have high frets here or low frets causing fret buzz. But I'm expecting, as soon as I start doing this, I am expecting this to tell me where the high and low spots are. And even though I've said to you, you know, at the first touch you could say, well, this is a good set of frets, I'm expecting to see a few little ups and downs. Okay, so we've got a low spot here. So what we've got is most things cutting. So we've got I don't know how well you can see this in the light. Never as easy as you can with the naked eye. We've got cutting, 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 not much, not much. So it's a little low spot about here. Starting to cut, but not much. Cutting a little bit, cutting, cutting, not much, none, hardly any, none. So another low spot around the 12th, around the 12th fret. A tiny bit, and we've got this one here, which is 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 is actually quite high, relatively speaking. Now it's not causing things not to play, as I've said, it's actually all the individual notes are playing. So that unevenness is showing up because of the way this is cutting, but it's not so bad that it's stopping at play. So I don't need to really spend time attacking it because it's not causing us a problem, but it's part of what it's telling. It's the diagnostic thing. It's telling us what's going on, right? So I'm just going to do a tiny little bit more, and the sort of sense that I've included most of the frets, and fully aware that it's not refusing to play anywhere at the chosen action. But I can see that 17 is potentially high. It certainly is high at that end, and it may be something in the fretting process that isn't quite in fact, I can see it standing up at the end very slightly. That's okay. You know, it happens. Now I'm going to go across to the second fret. Now using the same calibration on the first and second each time. It's just a practical limitation I have to do. And I'm just sort of gently, hardly pressing down at all. I'm just rolling backwards and forwards, sort of roughly in the middle, taking up, you know, including all the frets in the treatment. And I'm going, as you can see, I'm sort of going a little bit side to side as well. And at that point I stop. And what's interesting is that the fret that was high at this end isn't really high after that point. So it's actually slightly low compared to the other ones by the time we get to the B track, but it's actually high at the edge. We're getting a little bit of dust kicking up, sound like the Apollo missions. Got some dust kicking up here, which means this fret's slightly higher in the middle than it was because it was barely touching at the end. So just a few individual fret peculiarities, but nothing major. But it does show us that, as I said at the beginning, there was a couple of low spots along the whole neck and the rest being relatively high. So we've got that sense of the little hillocks building up. Now, really, we're not expecting to hear any improvements. I'm not expecting to hear any improvements at this end because I'm just kind of diagnosing with the gentle leveling at this end. I'm recalibrating now what I call north of the G track. And it looks still pretty much the same relief curve. So I'll leave that there, move the string out of the way, prop it up, and then gently do the same. So the other thing that you can find is that the sort of shape of the neck can change from one side of the radius to the other, which is interesting. So you can have something that has a low spot here on that side but not on that side, and so it affects perhaps the high E and the B but not so much the low E and the A, which is kind of weird but entirely possible. So again, I'm just doing that to check. Okay, so we've got what's turning out where the dust shows. We've got a sort of high spot around here, although it was low to begin with on that side. It's a little bit high in the middle there on these frets, and there's a little bit of a high spot here. So I would say kind of high, low, high, and low towards this end. There's a low spot right there where it joins. So it's just interesting to know. So when I get down to, it's really when I get now to the D, the A and the E is when we sort of expect to hear some differences as we go. So what you tend to find is where you hit the low spots is where you will find you can start to hear some of the fret slap showing up. And it's kind of interesting because you will find it confirms usually where you think the low spot is, or where the frets tell you the low spot is then confirmed as you get a little bit of noisy fret slap going off in there. So what I'm doing now is in doing this very gentle leveling, I'm probably making it possible to play this even a slightly lower action than it's currently set, but I wouldn't recommend doing it because I think where it's set for now is about as low as you'd want to have a Telecaster playing. It's actually starting to look okay. Yeah, very little material. I mean, it's a fine tuning this. On these new guitars, the good news is the quality has been improving, and I've not found myself having to, well, I've not found myself encountering heinously out of whack individual frets that I was able to find in many second-hand guitars. And I think I don't mean second-hand. That's not the defining factor. Older guitars. So we're into the 20s, and it seems that the manufacturers are definitely improving. Some of the manufacturers are definitely improving the condition of the frets that they're putting out on these guitars, and certainly the good quality manufacturers like Fender and Epiphone have made a noticeable improvement. Now here at this point, because I'm only thinking of fret slap, I'm really not pressing anywhere other than gently holding it if I can in the center, because I want the curve of this thing to do its work, as opposed to kind of pressing down such a way that I would deform this leveling beam. So I want its built-in curve to help us out. So I'm brushing this dust off, because if I don't, it's quite easy for it to start building up on the fingerboard. Before I put any solution on to clean the frets off, I'll put the masking tape on so that we're keeping the fingerboard as clean as possible. A little bit there. So a tiny bit from about 5 up to 12 is still, and there's a sort of high, we know there's a high spot around 12, so I'll just very gently do a little bit more, but this time I'm going to do what I call focusing my energies on 5 to 12. So I'm kind of centering on there and gently putting a little bit more downward pressure on there to even this out, because when there's a little buckle in the neck and the frets are kind of sticking up in that area, there's nothing for it except to reduce them slightly, so that the distance between the peak of the hill and the bottom of the trough is reduced. That's the only way. It's the same as when you find a single low fret, you're trying to bottom out that low fret to make it match the ones either side of it. Where am I at? A little bit still up there. Again, hardly any pressure at all. This is just gravity led. There's a little bit of high going on up there. just nearly gone. A little tiny bit. It's not bad. Let me check where what the height of this is. Sometimes I catch myself trying to do it too low. That's not quite. That could be one of the reasons. Yeah. And then what's this one doing? Down there. Very fine tuning. Go to the E. Go to the E. So we're all around there. There's some choking, or not choking, some fret slapping going on. So let me calibrate for the E track, and we'll see if we can reduce this. Slightly overcurved. Spot on. So my feeling is that the top part of this E string track is where there's some either a high spot that's sort of interfering with the free spinning strings being played up there. So let's see if we can even that out a bit. One of the things that I often find with these anyway is that the ends of the frets are so prone to slightly sticking up. It's they that need a bit of work. Still in that gap there. Now, a little bit more downwards pressure on this. Which seems to usually do the trick, weirdly enough. Except when it doesn't. This is the old 9.5 Tele situation. Sometimes that doesn't seem to do. Doesn't seem to like the 1.5 height. And we've still got some relief in there. Interesting. Well, first of all, that's not in tune. Bit there and a bit there. Occasionally you get some guitars, and bizarrely enough, in my experience, it can be Telecasters that for some reason don't like the 1.5mm action that Strats like. And there's not a scale length difference, there's not a string gauge difference, there's no other structural reason. Which means occasionally do a little bit more on that 12th fret, and that's it. I'm going to stop and take a cup of coffee and look at it and consider whether I want to do more or less. So a little bit on the 12th, around the 12th fret. It's now starting to feel like a single low note stroke high note issue, but we'll see how it plays out. A little bit of extra pressure there. And the outcome is having done as much leveling as I want to do and clearing up most of it. If it doesn't get to where I want it to be, then I have to concede that I've probably squeezing that action. So that's 1.5. That's barely 1.5. That's under 1.5. That's the sort of target. It's sort of living up to it on the top side, but the strings are moving more. Maybe it's the 10 gauge string that has a certain way of spinning, I don't know. But there's something about Telecasters, but I can't explain it. So that tiny bit of fret slap will be fixed by the tiniest, usually by the tiniest lift. Or maybe not. That's amazing. Telecaster, why don't you do it? There you go. Tiniest, there's like a limit below which it cannot go. And it's dead on it right there. That's amazing. And there's absolutely no trouble at all at that limit. It's really weird. That's like it's like intolerant. It's like I don't know, a third of a millimeter or even quarter of a millimeter difference, and it just will not play, or will not play ball. And then take it that tiny bit up, and it goes, "Nah, I'm in my happy place." Weird as weird. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop at that point, and I'm going to mask off the neck, holding my breath, of course, thinking, please don't be one of those Fenders that does the bad stuff. Just note, I'm going to take off the outside inwards so I don't lose this nut flinging it across the floor. So we'll have the two middle strings holding it down to begin with, or until we take it off. What I might do is I've got a little tool, homemade tool, which I will try and clear up the, oh well, took it off for us anyway. Try and clear up the crunchy stuff on the edge of there. I should be able to do it if I'm very careful and don't let it overlap. And it's just a bit of detritus left over from the finishing and the polishing by the looks of it. So these strings can come off and get binned. Good for nothing. Yeah, I think sometimes Telecasters for some reason tell me there's a limit beyond which they won't go. And I'm not really, I can't say I've got an idea of why that is. But they don't. Seen it millions of times before, and I cannot think anything about the construction that should impose a performance limit on it like that. And it's only tiny, like I said, it's about a quarter of a millimeter at most, not even that really. But it just sort of says, no, you go any lower than that, and I'm not going to do it. I'm going to rattle and give you fret slap until you're old and grey. And then you take it up a tiny, barely noticeable bit, and it's gone. Right, so here we're going to do I'll do this off camera in a minute, but this is me masking it off. Actually, let me think. Let me do something here. I'm going to put this on here. Let's do this thing first. Let's put some tape on there like that, and then let's see if I can use my little homemade tool wherever it is. Where's it gone? Where did I put it? Oh no, man, it was around. Right, I'll try and find it. If I can find it, I will use it to do a gentle clean on the very edges. It was hanging out over here somewhere. It's usually in one of these jars, but it isn't. Would you believe it? Anyway, but I'll cover that up, do that if I can find the tool, or I'll have to make another one. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is cover this off, pray to the gods of clear poly finish that this is not one of the batches of Fender guitars that sheds its finish at the first bidding. A certain era of USA Fenders seem to be doing it, and you know, you start to look online and then you find forum discussions where everybody goes, oh yes, it's that, I've had that problem too, and it's pretty depressing. What I'll do, just while you're here and before I go off to make a cup of tea, what I'll be doing with these frets, once I've masked them off, I will be getting the StewMac fret crowning file, which is this trusty, expensive old thing, and I will be setting the jumbo side of it, and basically I'll be reshaping the frets, and wherever there's a slightly flattened bit, this will reshape it and turn it back into a nice arch shape, which is what we want the fret to be shaped like. And as long as I leave this little thin black line down the center of the fret and stop before I erase it, it will tell me that I haven't scraped to the top of the fret, which means I haven't reduced the action on the fret, sorry, the height of the fret, which means they're still level, which is good. So that's what I'll do off camera to all of the rest of them. I better just mark up this one so I know where to start from. The reason I want to do that with the tape on is that when I get a cloth to clean, or when I start to try and clean off all of the residual pen, I don't want it running around on the fingerboard, so it's better if it goes on this masking tape than on the fretboard. So I've got some loads of bits of pre-cut tape over here, and somewhere there'll be a blade, so I'm just pulling bits of tape that I've cut before, putting it to work. Yeah, so yeah, weirdness. Telecasters, I don't know why they seem to be so sensitive to the action setting. I've had fights with Telecasters before that just don't want to go below that minimum setting, and if you go below it, they just throw you off, kind of. It's like a bucking bronco. They go, no, I'm not having it. You're going to get fret slap, and that's your lot. It's weird. A lot of it is very unscientific anyway. I think a lot of the places and institutions that try and make it scientific are, I think disingenuous is quite a good word there. There's a bit of mystery. Well, it's not mystery really. What it is variables and organic variables. I suppose like wood is not something that behaves the same all the time, and it's not consistent and dependable in how it behaves. It will bend one way one day, and if the weather changes it will do something else, which is all very weird. I followed some link or some discussion on Facebook. There was an ad for a thing called do you know what? I've forgotten its name already. That's how crap a piece of marketing it is. Mogambi, some weird sounding guitar brand that's claiming to be a sort of fold up travel guitar with kind of snap on arms and a circular headstock. And honestly, I can't remember what its name was, but it's kind of, it makes a big deal about it. Anyway, there was this thing you can go and watch. Somebody's done a review of one on the YouTubes, and like lots of things, you kind of think, okay, it's one of these new inventions. Yeah, keep an eye out. Let's go and let's go and look at what the price is, and well, let's find the website. And the first thing you notice is on the Facebook ad thing that I came across, it wasn't really obvious where you to go to find out more about this thing. So that was a bit of a kind of fail. And then so I did a bit of YouTube searching, and I found one review of a guy putting it together in showing it how it worked, and it's a piezo driven snap together travel style guitar, a bit like the Yamaha Silent thing, but with a bit more recording functionality built in, and some inbuilt reverb and a little speaker, and it's kind of okay. Well, you know, sort of piezo snap together arms that you take out of the side of the bag and bolt on, you know, that kind of push into a little receptacle kind of thing, and it, you know, it seemed okay. And then, but it's got this circular O-shaped headstock, which puts some of the keys, some of the tuning buttons, kind of way up round the top, which immediately met with a few critical comments on YouTube, as you'd expect, or on Facebook as well. Anyway, so I still was interested. Well, how much is this thing? And I kind of went looking, and I went to their website. Somebody said, no, you've got to go to their website. So struggling to find out any useful price information, I went to this website, and it had nothing. It was set, there was a hint that it was a Kickstarter project, so maybe it's not even properly off the ground. But anyway, when I went there, there were no guitars. You know, you went to click the tab that said guitars, and it said nothing found. So that's starting to get a bit useless. And then I couldn't find anywhere that had a price. It's Korean made, I think, but I couldn't find anywhere with a price or any information about how you would buy one. So it just seemed a real crazy thing to do. In the, you know, it's one of those things where people can sometimes get blinded by a product and end up losing track of the most obvious thing, which is how does the average person you're showing it off to, how do they get connected to it, interested in it, or buy it, you know. And I just found it kind of impossible and gave up, really. And that's partly because it wasn't that interesting a proposition. I know the inventors are probably bowled over by it, but just didn't really appeal to me too much. I think partly because it's piezo only, so I think people kind of look at it and sort of think it'd be better if it had magnetic pickups, but so in the absence of them, it's just piezo, and it sounds like a piezo guitar. I'm just masking off some the area around here to hopefully keep that all nice and safe from harm. So, right, I'm going to go off and finish the crowning, get a cup of tea, and polish this all out, and come back when we're ready to restring. So, see you shortly. Okay, you may have noticed that the Tusk nut and the string tree have changed. The reason why is I realised that the Tusk nut I was using had been, I had tried to use it before, and I'd ended up just slightly reducing one of the slots in it for because it was not the right radius for what I was doing. So having realized that I'd defeated the pledge of quality, which was the untrammeled nut slots, I replaced it with a curved black one, changed the string tree to black, which all goes with the black and butterscotch theme. So right, what am I going to do now? Oh, I'm going to put that there, and I'm going to load up some strings. So I've polished all the thingies, those things, polished all the frets, cleaned everything up, changed the string tree and the nut, made another adjustable one. Probably should have just used that one from the start and done it that way, but hey. So we're ready to go. I think this is about the right height. I may have to do a tiny tweak to it along the way, but we'll get the strings on, and that will enable us to tell. So I should be fitting the middle two first, which would make more sense. to hold the nut in place. So here we go with the D and the G, and I'll just show you in a second how I do them up. D and the G, come along now. It's always difficult, these through stringings. Always, the string always seems to catch on the smaller bore of the hole once you come up through the body, and it just makes things really difficult. It doesn't want to go through. It's like there's not many options. It sort of bounces around and hits the side, and anyway, right. So we have the G. So let's start by lining up all of the what's it. So the thing I go on about, and Si, you've probably heard me go on about this a million times, that the secret of tuning stability is first and foremost 50% your nut and 50% your the slack in your strings. So here we are making sure that we've made sure the nut is right by removing the old nut and replacing it with a adjustable Tusk one, which is a small improvement on the one that was already on there, but they're getting, that's the right approach that Fender's got. I think any guitar making company that puts a plastic nut on really doesn't deserve to be making guitars. There's no excuse for it anymore. So we're putting on the G and the D first. So I'm pulling back a fret, holding on to this string here, the held string, going over the loose string to begin with, and as it comes round, I'm pulling up the loose string and threading the held string under the loose string until it takes up the slack, and then that's ready to cut. And that ensures as little string, is that the word I'm looking for? Yes, as little coils of string as possible going around the posts, and that means the less you have on there, the less chance there is to store up slack. So 50% of the nut, of the tuning stability, is in the nut, the quality of the slots and the material they're made out of. So Tusk, factory made slots made out of Tusk, set at the perfect first fret height. God, this is so hard to get through these little tiny holes. Yeah, perfect first fret action, and that's the nut is 50%, and the other 50% is getting rid of the unreleased slack still in your strings. Once you've done both of those, your guitar will play and stay in tune. Although I now cannot get this to, for some reason, undo. It's tangled. Brilliant. Hello. Come on. Would you have to do this? Please, come on. This is no good. I've got tangled strings here. Yeah, anyway, so a lot of people think that the tuners have something to do with tuning, and they do in the sense that their purpose is to help you tune the string up in the first place, but they don't have any significant part to play in tuning stability, which is, it might sound counterintuitive, but if you're going to, there are reasons to upgrade tuners, because for a start, more expensive tuners with better gearing is a more precise and pleasurable tuning experience, but that's only in terms of getting the guitar up to pitch. In terms of stability, even the cheap Chinese vintage style tuners, the pressed metal things, they will hold a guitar in tune if you have the strings will not go through here. If you have the nut taken care of and the slack removed from the strings, this becomes an absolute royal pain getting these through here. It doesn't want to go through. Come on. That's a bit of a drag. Come on, surely. Right, what are we looking at? Sorry, we're off the track again. Yeah, so contrary to what you might imagine, tuner's got naught to do with it. So we've taken care of the nut by means of opting for a Tusk for a start and opting for the adjustable one so we can get the first fret dead right. And the reason the first fret action is important to tuning is that if you're above about 0.5 of a millimeter over the first fret, you'll get notes playing sharp when you're playing down by the first fret. And that, to all intents and purposes, feels like your guitar is out of tune. In fact, it's not really. It's playing sharp, so it's probably more of a kind of intonation problem, technically, I suppose. But you know, it effectively makes the fretted notes out of tune with the open notes, open strings. So that's a big tuning problem, experienced as not being in tune. And a lot of people who come bring that problem to me express it in terms of, I can't, for some reason I can't get this guitar in tune. And actually it's how I experienced it myself when I was struggling with my Taylor Baby many years ago, which basically forced me to learn about that problem and then figure out that you could apply that knowledge to lots of other, or lots of budget guitars who people would insist couldn't be made to stay in tune because they were budget guitars. And I discovered that in fact you could make them very easily play and stay in tune by taking care of those two components I mentioned, the nut and the slack. So we take care of the nut. The next bit will be, once we've fitted the strings, is to take care of the slack. And you can see that having done it, strung it this way, we've helped the slack problem by first of all storing up as little material string as possible. So that will give us a head start to pulling and stretching out all of the slack that we need to. Now, when it comes to slack, most of us grow up used to doing a very quick. You're tipping over. Stand up straight. We're sort of used to doing a very quick pull on the strings, and then we get off and play. I think if you want your guitar to stay and play in tune, you ought to get into a habit of pulling a lot harder and tuning, or stretching I should say, a lot more of the slack out of your strings. So this is what I do. Start by putting it in tune. Now, before I go any further, I'm just going to check the height of the nut. In fact, this one is pretty much almost the right place to begin with, so we only need to do a little bit of adjustment on here, tiny bit in fact, where we want it to be. That's fine. So I'm going to basically gently give everything a pull again, and even this will eke out some stretch, and you'll hear it detune. Ooh, yeah. Now the hard work. Grab your strings between thumb and forefinger and give it a stretching. And this is where you're going to get rid of the stuff, the slack, that you don't know is in there, but it will let itself be known when you least expect it. So all of this slack will come out a tiny bit at a time. And that's its secret. Unless you take it all out at the beginning, it will just leak out a tiny bit of detuning every time you play, and it will keep on doing that for as many years, sometimes even years, as it takes to get all of its natural slack kind of pulled through. and then it will stabilize and you'll be able to play and stay in tune. Now what you find is that the plain strings will stretch out fully quickest, and you have to be obviously gentle with the high E or else you can break it, but the wound ones will take longer. So however much that detuning was, that was still waiting to come out when you're playing. Lovely. Gorgeous. I'll do one more stretching with thumbs and four fingers, and then we should be close to the finishing line. Next thing will be to set the intonation for these strings, and the intonation is something that doesn't really make a lot of sense to get too hyped up about the intonation. The reason for that is that it by definition has to be individual to every player. So actually, no matter what anyone will try and make you believe, your guitar tech or luthier can't set an absolute intonation, because there's a variable in there that he or she cannot know, and that is how hard you fret the strings. We're close now. Yeah, so that the force with which you fret the notes when playing determines whether or not the note, how sharp or flat the note is. And the thing is, if that's a variable in the equation, and it's a very large variable, then all I can do is set it for an average. I can pretend that I'm an average fella and set it for the average fella. You might grip harder than me, in which case, or you might fret harder than me, in which case it isn't going to make any sense, because every note that you play will be slightly sharper than the notes that I play, and so you will probably end up by setting your intonation at a slightly different place to me. So unfortunately, intonation is only an approximation. Sounds like a slogan. Right, you can sort of see what I'm doing. Yeah, it's an approximation at best. So what I'll do is set for an average, and that's what I did when I checked it earlier on. So I think it's going to be slightly needing adjusting, but it may be off because the guy in the factory who set it up prior to dispatch, he may have had a much stronger grip than me, or when he was fretting. So I'm going to hit the harmonic, tune it to E. New strings. They're actually better. So the E looks about right. If we agree that E is right, then the B and the G it's a bit of a straight line at the moment, so I don't think anyone set it in the factory at all, if I'm honest. So now I'm going to take the B and the G somewhat further back, and to do that I'm going to need to slack off, and that means I also need to slack off the other strings, because I'm going to have to adjust them all in sequence or in line with it. So the good thing is, once you've got one lined up or one intonated, you can pretty much know where the others fall. I wonder if this will do. Yeah. So now I'm kind of going off the first one I've intonated, and I'm going to now get all of these others into a pattern, a familiar pattern, which is pretty consistent for sets of 3 wound and 3 plain strings. Now the only concern about this is a long way back. It's further back than I would want to go. We're almost standing on the screws. So let's see. When you wind and unwind the strings, slack them off, you'll always find there's a bit of slack crept in. Now that's saying the G's a little bit flat at this point, so I've got it right, but perhaps I've overdone it a little bit. Well, that's not bad. So let's just creep forward a tiny fraction. That's a G that was just slightly over, so we'll come back to there on the G, and we'll push these other ones back a little bit and make them catch up. Now I've basically got a sense of the distance between them on this set of strings, and I can kind of get everything where it should be. Saying the A is a bit far back, so let's push the... that's not moving anywhere. Right, let's push you out a bit. There we go. That's quite interesting in that these strings are, saddles are a little bit further back than I would hope, which to me says something about either the cut of the neck, how they machine the pocket where the neck fits in and the length that sits in the whole thing, or as you can see, that's intonated with a little bit far back in the bridge plate for my liking. Not a lot of room in there, but I kind of hope to see them a bit further back, but that depends on routing or getting the distance correct. So who knows, it could be just a kind of peculiarity of the factory, but that's it. I'm not going to play a sample because it's a Telecaster and it's late and it's time to go. But thank you for watching, and yeah, ready to go. Adjustable nut fitted. Oh, I've got a tiny little lift up on this end because I heard it just buzzed on the there we go. There we are. Oh, and this has to get attached to the scratch plate because that's the essential little adjuster key, hex key. Ta-da! So there we are, all done and dusted. Thanks for watching. See you very soon.